It was supposed to be a night to relax and enjoy ourselves, a break from the daily grind. But in a single moment, everything I thought I knew about my life crumbled. "Mark, I'm bored," Rachel slurred, her voice cutting through the hum of the party. The room went silent, the kind of silence that presses down on you like a weight. All eyes turned toward her, and I could feel the awkward glances of our friends bouncing between us, their unease thick in the air. Rachel, my wife of 3 years, stood in the center of the room, swaying slightly with a glass of wine in hand. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide with a drunken intensity that made my stomach drop. I froze, unable to move, as her words hit me like a slap. "Our life is so dull, so predictable," she continued, her voice rising with each word. "I need excitement, and I found it with someone else." She laughed, a hollow, bitter sound, and my world tilted. The silence deepened as I tried to process what she had just said. My ears rang, my chest tightened, and my vision blurred. I glanced around the room at our friends, their expressions a mix of shock and pity. No one knew where to look. No one dared to speak. Rachel turned to me, her face a mix of defiance and drunken indifference. "I'm tired of pretending, Mark," she said, her voice slurred but loud. "I've been seeing other people. I needed more." Her words hit like a wrecking ball, shattering everything I thought we had. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I forced myself to stay composed. "I think it's time everyone leaves," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. One by one, our friends shuffled out, murmuring awkward goodbyes and apologies. I stood motionless as Rachel wobbled on her feet, still smirking as though she had just shared a joke instead of detonating a bomb in the middle of our life. When the last guest left, I turned to her, my voice cold and detached. "You've had too much to drink. Go to bed." Rachel stared at me for a moment, her smirk faltering. Then she stumbled toward the stairs, leaving me alone with the wreckage of what had just happened. The events of that night didn't come out of nowhere, though at the time I wished they had. Looking back, the signs were there all along, subtle but persistent, like cracks in a wall you can't quite see until it collapses. Rachel and I had been married for 3 years. I met her at a mutual friend's party, where she immediately caught my eye. She had this energy about her, a way of making every person in the room feel like they mattered. Her laughter was contagious, her smile magnetic. I was quieter, more grounded, but somehow we balanced each other out. For a while, it felt like we were perfect together. But as the months turned into years, things began to change. I worked long hours managing my small tech company, often coming home late and exhausted. Rachel used to tease me about being a workaholic, but she'd always wait up, ready with a warm smile and a glass of wine. That warmth started to fade somewhere along the way. She stopped waiting up, stopped asking about my day. Conversations that used to flow naturally became short and perfunctory, like we were two strangers sharing a house. I noticed little things at first. She spent more time on her phone, laughing at messages she wouldn't share. She started going out more, just catching up with friends, she'd say. When I asked if she wanted me to join her, she'd brush it off with a smile. "It's just girl time, Mark. You'd be bored." Her explanations seemed harmless enough, but there was something in the way she said them, something that made the back of my mind itch. Still, I told myself I was overthinking. Rachel was outgoing and I wasn't. That was part of who she was, part of what I loved about her. If she needed space, I wasn't going to be the jealous, overbearing husband. So I focused on work, convinced that my efforts to provide for us would keep her happy. A week before the party, I noticed she'd started dressing up more. Bright colors, new styles. She'd always been stylish, but this was different. She'd spend hours in front of the mirror, applying makeup with a level of care I hadn't seen in years. When I complimented her, she'd flash a quick smile and say, "Thanks," but her eyes didn't quite meet mine. I thought maybe I wasn't doing enough to make her feel special. So that night, before the party, I planned a romantic dinner for the two of us. I made her favorite meal, spaghetti carbonara, and set the table with candles and her favorite wine. When she came home, she looked genuinely surprised, even happy. "Wow, Mark," she said, smiling as she took in the scene. "What's the occasion?" "Just thought we could have a nice evening together," I said, hoping this would bring us closer. For a while it worked. We talked, laughed, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like the old days. But then, just as we were finishing dessert, Rachel's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her smile widening. "Why don't we invite a few friends over?" she suggested, her tone light but eager. "We could have a small party, make the night more fun." I hesitated. This was supposed to be our night, a chance to reconnect. But I didn't want to dampen her excitement. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. Maybe a change of pace would be good for us. Within an hour, our house was full of people. Rachel was in her element, laughing and chatting, her wine glass never empty. I tried to join in, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong there, not in my own home. She was thriving, while I stood on the sidelines, watching her from a distance. That's when I noticed it. The way she leaned into certain conversations, the way her laughter seemed a little too loud, her gestures a little too intimate. Something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, these were our friends. Rachel loved me. I had no reason to doubt her. But as the night wore on, that unease grew stronger. I couldn't explain it, but something about the way she moved, the way she looked at me from across the room, it felt like she was miles away, even when she was standing right in front of me. And then she said it. "Mark, I'm bored," she called out, her voice slurring, her smile wide and careless. The room fell silent, and everything began to unravel. The energy in the room shifted the moment Rachel blurted out those words. "Mark, I'm bored," she repeated, louder this time, as though the first declaration hadn't been humiliating enough. She swayed slightly, her wine glass dangerously close to tipping, a carefree grin plastered across her face. My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to stay composed. "Rachel, maybe we should talk about this later," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my hands were clenched into fists at my sides. But she wasn't done. "No, Mark, let's talk about it now," she slurred, waving her glass around for emphasis. "Our life is so dull, so predictable. I need more, you know." Her tone was casual, almost conversational, as though she were discussing the weather and not dismantling our marriage in front of a room full of people. The silence was deafening. Our friends, who had been laughing and chatting just moments before, now sat frozen, their faces a mix of shock and discomfort. I caught a few awkward glances exchanged across the room, but no one dared to speak. It was like everyone was waiting for a punchline that wasn't coming. Rachel continued, oblivious to the tension she'd created. "And you know what?" she said, her voice rising in pitch. "I found it. I found that excitement. Somewhere else." She laughed, the sound hollow and sharp, and the room seemed to tilt under me. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what she was saying. She wasn't joking. This wasn't some drunken attempt at being edgy or funny. She was confessing, no, announcing, to everyone that she had been unfaithful. I looked at her, searching her face for some sign of regret or shame, but all I saw was defiance. "I've been seeing someone else," she said, her words slurring together. "Actually, a few others." She giggled, and the sound made my skin crawl. "It's just more fun, you know?" The knot in my stomach tightened, and I felt heat rise to my face. I glanced around the room, at the people who had come into our home expecting a night of laughter and friendship, only to be dragged into this nightmare. Some were looking down at their drinks, avoiding eye contact. Others stared at Rachel, their expressions a mix of pity and disbelief. I wanted to shout, to demand she stop, but my voice wouldn't come. I felt frozen, paralyzed by the weight of her words and the humiliation of having our private life laid bare for everyone to see. Rachel swayed again, and one of her friends reached out to steady her, but she waved them off. "Oh, come on, Mark," she said, turning to me with a smirk. "Don't act so surprised. You had to know, right? I mean, you're always working, always tired. I just needed more." The words hit me like a freight train. My vision blurred, and my chest tightened. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me, waiting for my reaction, but I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could do was stand there, replaying her words in my head. After what felt like an eternity, I finally found my voice. "I think it's time everyone leaves," I said, my tone cold and firm. I didn't raise my voice, but the weight behind my words made it clear I wasn't asking. One by one, our friends began to gather their things, murmuring awkward goodbyes and apologies as they shuffled toward the door. Rachel stood in the middle of the room, watching them go with a blank expression. When the last guest had left, I turned to her. "You've had too much to drink," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Go to bed." She blinked at me, as though she hadn't expected me to say anything. For a moment, she looked almost confused. But then she shrugged, stumbling slightly as she made her way toward the stairs. "Whatever you say, Mark," she mumbled, disappearing up to our bedroom without another word. As soon as she was out of sight, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The silence of the empty house pressed down on me, and the weight of what had just happened finally hit me. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted, had stood in front of everyone we knew and admitted to betraying me. And worse, she didn't seem to care. I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. Her words echoed in my mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. "I've been seeing someone else, actually a few others." The image of her laughing, so casual and indifferent, burned in my memory. For the first time that night, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of her betrayal. Anger, humiliation, heartbreak. They all crashed over me at once, leaving me gasping for air. But even as the emotions threatened to drown me, one thought rose above the rest. This wasn't over. After Rachel stumbled upstairs to bed, the house fell into an oppressive silence. The laughter, the music, the buzz of conversation. All of it was gone, leaving behind only the weight of what had just happened. I sat on the couch, my hands gripping the edge of the cushions as though holding on to something solid could stop my world from spinning. Her words replayed in my mind, each one hitting harder than the last. "I've been seeing someone else. Actually, a few others." How could she say something like that so casually, so publicly? How could she laugh as if the destruction of our marriage was a joke? The humiliation of having our friends witness her confession burned hotter than any anger I'd ever felt. I wanted to storm upstairs, to wake her up and demand an explanation. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the knowledge that, in her drunken state, she wouldn't give me the answers I needed. Or maybe I was afraid of what she might say. Afraid that she wouldn't deny it, wouldn't apologize, wouldn't care. So I sat there, frozen, as a torrent of emotions raged inside me. Anger, hurt, betrayal. They all swirled together, threatening to consume me. The woman I had loved, the woman I had worked so hard to build a life with, had just ripped it all apart in a single evening. And the worst part? She didn't even seem sorry. I thought back to the early days of our marriage, the way she used to light up when I walked into a room. The way she used to tell me with so much conviction that I was all she needed. Was it all a lie? Had I missed the signs? I'd been so busy trying to provide for us, so focused on making her happy, that I hadn't noticed how far apart we drifted. Or maybe I had noticed but chose to ignore it, convincing myself that we were just going through a rough patch. But this wasn't a rough patch. This was something else entirely. This was betrayal, calculated, deliberate, and unapologetic. The anger bubbling inside me began to solidify, turning into something colder, sharper. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing. I couldn't let this slide. As the hours ticked by, I tried to calm myself, to think rationally about what to do next. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Her drunken words were one thing, but I needed to know if there was truth behind them. Was this just Rachel trying to shock me? Or had she really been unfaithful? My eyes drifted to the stairs, where her phone sat charging on the nightstand. The temptation was too strong to resist. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't care. I needed answers. I needed to know just how deep her betrayal went. I waited until I was sure she was asleep before heading upstairs. The sound of her steady breathing greeted me as I crept into the room. Her phone was right where I thought it would be, its screen dim but active. My hands trembled as I picked it up, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would wake her. I tiptoed back downstairs, needing the space and quiet to brace myself for whatever I might find. Sitting on the couch, I unlocked her phone with a shaking hand. The screen lit up, and for a moment, I hesitated. Did I really want to do this? Did I really want to know? But then I thought about her laughter, the casual way she'd admitted to seeing other men, and my hesitation evaporated. What I found confirmed everything she had said. And more. Her messages were a minefield of betrayal. There were explicit texts with multiple men, conversations filled with flirtation and promises of secret meetings. Photos and videos followed, each one worse than the last. I saw her in moments I thought were reserved for us, captured with men whose faces I didn't recognize, in places I didn't know. The truth was undeniable, laid out in vivid detail. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had dismantled everything we'd built together. My stomach churned as I scrolled through the messages, my mind reeling with the realization that the woman I had trusted completely was someone I didn't recognize anymore. I dropped the phone onto the couch, as though it had burned me, and buried my face in my hands. The weight of her betrayal crushed me, pressing down until I could barely breathe. The anger and heartbreak I'd been holding back finally broke through, and I let out a strangled cry, the sound of it raw and unfamiliar. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, to scream at her for what she'd done. But I knew it wouldn't matter. In her drunken state, she wouldn't give me anything but half-hearted excuses or empty apologies. And even if she did, it wouldn't change the truth of what I'd seen. She had destroyed my trust, and there was no coming back from that. By the time the first light of dawn began creeping through the windows, my mind was made up. I couldn't stay. Not in this house, not in this marriage, not in the ruins of what we once had. Rachel had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. The sunrise filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room, but it brought no comfort. I hadn't slept a second. The events of the night played over and over in my head like a broken record, each memory cutting deeper than the last. Rachel's drunken confession, the humiliation in front of our friends, and the damning messages I had found on her phone. They all pointed to one inescapable truth. I couldn't stay. I sat on the couch, staring at the phone I had dropped hours earlier, as if hoping it would give me an explanation that made this all make sense. But there was no explanation, no excuse that could undo what she'd done. Rachel hadn't just betrayed me. She had made a mockery of everything we'd built together. I looked around the house, at the pictures on the walls, the furniture we'd picked out together, the life we'd spent years building. It all felt hollow now, like a stage set for a story that no longer existed. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a reminder of the love I had poured into someone who had tossed it aside like it meant nothing. The decision came quietly, almost calmly, as though it had been waiting for me all along. I couldn't live like this. I couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies and infidelity. Rachel had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and began packing. I didn't take much, just a few changes of clothes, my laptop, and the essentials. This wasn't about running away. It was about starting over. As I moved through the house, I paused in front of a photo of us from our wedding day. Rachel was smiling, her eyes bright with joy. I stared at it for a long moment, wondering if that version of her had ever been real. I placed the photo face down on the table and continued packing. Before I left, I considered leaving a note, something to explain why I was walking away. But as I thought about it, I realized I didn't owe her that. She knew what she had done. She didn't need me to spell it out for her. Instead, I opened my phone and sent a single text. I know everything. I'm leaving. Don't contact me. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the silence of the house one last time. It didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like escape. As I stepped outside, the crisp morning air hit me, and for the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe. I tossed my bag into the car and pulled out of the driveway, leaving behind the wreckage of my marriage and everything that tied me to it. The road ahead felt uncertain, but it also felt like freedom. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. "I need to start divorce proceedings," I said, my voice steady but firm. "No delays. I want this over with as soon as possible." Next, I reached out to my accountant to ensure my finances were in order. Rachel wasn't the type to fight over money. She'd always been practical in that regard. But I didn't want to leave anything to chance. I made it clear that I wanted a clean break, no loose ends. Finally, I called my parents. "I need to stay with you for a while," I told them. "I've left Rachel. I'll explain everything when I get there." My mother's voice was full of concern, but I reassured her that I was okay, or at least that I would be. Rachel called me that afternoon. The screen lit up with her name, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What could she possibly say that would make any of this better? The damage was done. I silenced the call and threw the phone onto the passenger seat. Over the next few days, her messages poured in, each one more frantic than the last. She begged me to talk to her, to come home, to work things out, but I couldn't even bring myself to read her words. There was nothing left to say. The house, the life, the woman I had once loved. They were all behind me now. And as painful as it was, I knew I had made the right decision. Sometimes walking away isn't an act of weakness. It's an act of strength. The calls started almost immediately after I left. Rachel must have woken up to find the house empty, the note missing, and the silence deafening. Her first few calls went unanswered. So did the texts that followed, each one more frantic than the last. At first, they were filled with confusion. "Mark, where are you? Are you okay? I woke up and you weren't here. Please call me." When I didn't respond, the tone shifted. She started pleading. "Mark, please, we need to talk. I know I messed up, but we can work this out. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Just come home so we can talk." I didn't read them all. Couldn't. The pain was still too fresh, and her words felt hollow after everything I had seen and heard. The Rachel I knew was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized, someone I could no longer trust. By the third day, her desperation reached its peak. She called over and over, leaving voicemails that oscillated between anger and heartbreak. "You can't just leave like this," she shouted in one message, her voice trembling with frustration. "I know I made a mistake, but you're not even giving me a chance to explain." In another, she was sobbing, her voice raw. "Please, Mark, I need you. I don't know what to do without you. Just come home. We can fix this. Promise." I listened to that voicemail twice. For a moment, I almost believed her. I almost let myself hope that maybe there was a way to piece things back together. But then I remembered the messages on her phone, the photos, the videos, the confessions she had made in front of our friends. This wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern, a choice she had made over and over again. And I couldn't forgive her for that. On the fifth day, after yet another barrage of calls, I finally picked up. "What do you want, Rachel?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. "Mark," she said, her voice breaking. "Why did you leave? Why are you doing this? You didn't even give me a chance to explain." "Explain what?" I shot back. "Explain how you've been cheating on me with multiple people? Explain how you humiliated me in front of everyone we know? I don't need your explanations, Rachel. I saw everything I needed to see." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her tone was different, softer, more subdued. "I know I hurt you," she said. "I don't know what I was thinking. I was bored, and I made stupid choices. But I swear, Mark, I still love you. I lost my way." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold onto the version of her I had fallen in love with. But I knew better. Love isn't enough without trust. And she had destroyed that. "I'm filing for divorce, Rachel," I said, cutting through her plea. "There's nothing left to talk about." "Don't do this," she begged. "Please, Mark, we can fix this. I'll do anything, therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just don't leave me." "It's too late," I said firmly. "You didn't just hurt me, Rachel. You destroyed us. And I can't come back from that." Her sobs echoed through the phone, but I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. just a strange, hollow sense of clarity. "Goodbye, Rachel," I said before ending the call. She tried reaching out a few more times after that, but I blocked her number. I couldn't keep reopening the wound by listening to her empty apologies. She had made her choices, and now I was making mine. The days following that final call were a blur. There were moments when the weight of what had happened threatened to crush me, but I refused to let it. I wasn't going to let Rachel's betrayal define me or my future. Instead, I focused on the one thing I could control: myself. I moved to a new city, far from the memories of our home, our friends, and the life we had built together. It wasn't easy. Packing up and leaving everything behind felt like walking away from a piece of myself, but I knew it was necessary. I needed a clean break, a fresh start, somewhere I could heal without her shadow hanging over me. The first few weeks were the hardest. Every corner of my new apartment felt cold and empty, a stark contrast to the warmth I had once known. I filled the silence with work, diving into projects and keeping myself busy. If I wasn't working, I was at the gym or exploring my new surroundings. Anything to keep my mind from wandering back to Rachel and the life I had left behind. Slowly, the pieces of my life began to come together. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and started to find joy in the little things again. A good book, a quiet walk, the freedom of living life on my terms. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I spent a lot of time reflecting on what had happened, not just on Rachel's betrayal but on the years leading up to it. I realized how much I had given to a relationship that wasn't giving back. I had poured everything into building a life with her, but somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of myself. I'd ignored the signs, excused the distance, and convinced myself that hard work and loyalty were enough to keep us together. But they weren't. In the months that followed, I began to focus on things I had neglected during our marriage. I picked up hobbies I had abandoned: photography, hiking, even cooking. It felt strange at first, like I was rediscovering parts of myself I hadn't seen in years. But with each passing day, I felt stronger, more whole. Rachel's name came up occasionally, usually through mutual acquaintances. I heard that she was struggling: financial troubles, failed relationships, and a general sense of unhappiness. Some part of me wanted to feel vindicated, but I didn't. Her downfall didn't bring me joy or satisfaction. It just felt sad. She had chosen a path that promised excitement but left her with nothing but regret. I had no interest in following her story. Rachel was a chapter of my life that had closed, and I wasn't looking back. With time, I began to feel more at peace. I realized that walking away from her wasn't just about escaping her betrayal. It was about finding myself again. And as painful as it was the best decision I could have made. Years passed and I had moved on. My life was no longer weighed down by the betrayal or the heartbreak Rachel had left in her wake. I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece, and carved out a new chapter filled with stability, growth, and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. So when Rachel showed up at my door one evening, it felt like a ghost from a past I had long buried. It had been years since I'd seen her. The woman standing before me was a shadow of the Rachel I once knew. Her confident, lively demeanor was gone, replaced by something fragile and uncertain. Her eyes were red, her makeup smudged from tears, and her voice wavered as she spoke. "Mark, please, can we talk?" she said, her hands trembling slightly. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Seeing her again stirred a mix of emotions I hadn't expected: surprise, a faint echo of the pain she'd caused, and, above all, indifference. I had come so far from the man who once stayed awake at night, haunted by her betrayal. The version of me standing in that doorway now was different, stronger, and less inclined to let her words affect me. "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice calm but detached. She hesitated, avoiding my gaze. I hired a private investigator. I needed to see you to make things right." Her admission struck me as both desperate and pathetic, and I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Make things right?" I repeated, crossing my arms. "Rachel, you can't just walk back into my life and undo everything you've done. It doesn't work like that." Her face crumpled, and tears spilled down her cheeks. I know I don't deserve this, she said, her voice shaking. I know I ruined everything. But I've lost so much, Mark. I've lost everything. And I can't go on without at least trying to fix what I broke. I studied her for a long moment, trying to find the right words. Fix what you broke? I said, my tone even. You didn't just break something, Rachel. You destroyed it. You destroyed us. And then you laughed about it like it didn't matter. Her sobs grew louder as she tried to step closer. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone, she choked out. I've been paying for it every day. Please, Mark, I've changed. I'm not the same person I was back then. But her words felt hollow, like a broken record repeating the same song. I shook my head, stepping back to create space between us. You only realized what you had when it was convenient for you, I said. When I gave you everything, when I was there for you, you were already somewhere else. This isn't about us, Rachel. It's about you. Her body tensed, but she didn't stop. I was stupid, Mark. I made a huge mistake, but I swear I've learned. Please, I'm begging you. I'll do anything to make it right. I sighed, exhaustion washing over me. There was no anger left, no heartbreak, just a quiet sense of finality. You can't fix this with words, Rachel, I said. It's too late. You made your choices and I've made mine. I've moved on and so should you. Her sobs grew louder as she dropped to her knees, her hands covering her face. Please, Mark, she cried. Don't do this. I've lost everything. I can't lose you too. I stared at her for a long moment, but my heart remained untouched. The man I had become wasn't tethered to the past anymore. You've already lost me, Rachel, I said quietly. You lost me the moment you chose them over us. Her sobbing continued as I stepped back and shut the door, closing it on the chapter of my life that she had once occupied. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Walking away from her had been the hardest thing I had ever done, but it had also been the best decision I ever made. And now I had no regrets. Looking back on everything, I can't say it was easy. Walking away from Rachel and the life we had built was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But it was also the moment I reclaimed my self-respect and my future. Betrayal has a way of cutting deeper than you think it will, leaving scars you don't notice until much later. And yet, those scars are reminders, not of weakness, but of resilience. For a long time, I asked myself the same questions over and over. Could I have done more? Could I have saved us? The truth is, it doesn't matter. Love isn't about carrying the weight of someone else's choices. It's about mutual trust, respect, and commitment. And once that trust is broken, sometimes there's no way to rebuild it, no matter how much you might want to. Rachel's betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. It was about a lack of respect for everything we had shared, for the life I had tried so hard to create for us. She made her choices and I made mine. Walking away wasn't an act of revenge or bitterness. It was an act of survival, a way to give myself the chance to heal and rebuild. Now, years later, I found peace. I've learned that letting go isn't about forgetting the past. It's about refusing to let it define you. Rachel was a chapter of my life, but that chapter is over and the story goes on. To anyone going through something similar, I'll say this: don't let betrayal rob you of who you are. It's not your job to fix someone who broke your trust. Love is about more than passion or history, it's about trust. And once that's gone, sometimes the only way forward is to let go.